It's time for Inside the L, the podcast covering all things LaSalle athletics and taking you behind the scenes. And now, here's your host, Ed LeFurge.
What's up, Explorers fans? That's right, you are listening to Inside the L, the podcast. Thanks to our good friend Kevin Casey, our PA announcer for men's and women's basketball, for recording that intro for us. You'll hear him on the outro as well. We appreciate you, Kevin, and all that you do. We're really excited to kind of kick off the podcast as part of a larger Inside the L series that the athletic department is doing. We did last year a lot of the written stories on our website. You're going to see that expanded. You're going to see some video feature stories, and then you're going to see this podcast that we'll bring to you every 2 weeks. And the way it's going to work is we're going to feature one main guest on the podcast, and that's going to be a staff member, a coach, a student athlete, a notable alumni within the athletic department. And then there'll be a piece of an alumni spotlight that we do each episode to kind of touch base with one of our alumni, see how they're doing, see how LaSalle has impacted them. So we're fortunate enough to kind of kick things off on our first episode. It only makes sense to interview the man himself, the AD, Mr. Brian Baptiste. And then on our alumni spotlight, we are going to be graced with the presence of our cross-country alumni Hall of Athletes inductee, Christa Plummer. So let's jump right away with our AD, Mr. Brian Baptiste. Brian, how you doing, man? Thanks for giving us some time.
I'm doing well, Ed. Thanks for having me. No pressure being the first one. We got to make sure that this is nice and exciting and engaging. But I'm excited to be here. I'm a huge podcast fan myself, so really excited to be able to do this.
Yeah, we're excited to have your support and have you on our inaugural episode to kind of bring fans and student athletes and staff and alumni alike kind of behind the scenes for an in-depth look on things that, we may not see, kind of from the outside. So jump right into it. I think the biggest thing we have to talk about, it's been plaguing the nation for, the last 6 months or so, the coronavirus pandemic. First and foremost, how are you? How's your family? You guys doing okay? What's quarantine kind of been like for you guys?
Yeah, family's well. I think, the one really positive piece out of the quarantine is that we've been able to spend a bunch of time together, right? And so, my wife's been a rock star. Wouldn't have been able to kind of navigate this environment, without her. And as I said, I think in my initial press conference, she's a point guard, for our family. And so it's good to be able to see the girls that are growing and, being able to be home to see first steps of our youngest and as she continues to talk and, just see the excitement of our middle daughter as well too with, learning different things, throughout this pandemic and, being able to, once, she's back at school now. So she's excited about the ability to be able to interact with her friends. So,
yeah,
all good.
Good to hear. I mean, I think anybody who works in athletics knows the difficulty with the long hours that we work to, provide for our student athletes, that, we have to be really cognizant of that work-life balance, making sure we get family time in. So that's awesome that, you've at least gotten the opportunity to spend some time with your wife and your kids. Let's jump right into things like week of the A10 men's basketball tournament. The women's season had ended at that point. The men were getting ready to play a game later that day. Like, kind of give us a little bit of the background of how everything transpired.
Really quickly. And, we were having a lot of conversations, certainly leading up to the tournament. And, I just remember getting up there. We had a few conference calls before that. We had a game the night before, 2 games the night before, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had a meeting that morning with, as ADs, and we had a plan to sort of move forward, right? And to continue to see and monitor and make sure that we were communicating as much as possible. And so I remember sort of being in Barclays where we had the meeting, and then getting on the phone and talking to some of our staff members. And then slowly I decided, well, I'm going to walk back to the hotel, right? And I'm walking back to the hotel and just received the call to say, and then at that point you started to see other conferences cancel the their tournaments, and then got a call saying, hey, listen, we're going to move forward with canceling the tournament. It was really tough, but like that's literally how quickly it happened, because we were planning. I mean, I remember being at Barclays and seeing, I want to say VCU was on the court, and I can't remember who VCU was playing, but they were on the court.
There was a game going on when that decision was made.
And, so it was just, and I don't think anybody realized that we would be where we are today, but it was so new, and everyone was trying to do what made the most sense from a health and safety standpoint. We continue to do what makes sense from a health and safety standpoint. And so this decision was made to cancel the tournament. And just kind of remember walking back again I called Ash and told him, and we got the team together, and we had a team meeting. And you can imagine, right, like the guys they were disappointed. They worked really hard for the seniors. That was their last go round, right? And I think when you want to get some closure to your season, there's one thing, but when you feel like you really didn't get the closure, I just only imagine how tough that may have felt for them.
Yeah, I certainly sympathize with them. It's not an experience that, we ever want to see any student athletes go through. What was that whole experience like for you to kind of navigate through?
Well, I think it was important to obviously communicate, right? Overly communicate. I think it was important to be there for our student athletes, right? And, one of the things that we sort of talked about in the meeting, you can imagine it was an emotional meeting, right? You worked so hard, and you wanted to get the opportunity to be able to play. And so just being there for them, and having the conversation about, like, listen, the game of basketball, like, doesn't define you, right? And although you're disappointed, just think about all of the things that you have done within your time on our campus, and you'll continue to do great things, and you will be the beacon of hope for a bunch of future explorers and people that look up to you, and just continue to be motivated to do the right things. But I think it's about just being there, for them, and, communicating and trying to get them to understand, what was happening at that point. Like I said earlier, it was so new, right? And we didn't know as much as we know now. And, but it was an interesting moment for sure. Something that, I won't forget. And I can visibly see, right, being in the room, talking to them, and the reactions. And, I think it showed how close the team was, right? And it showed how much the coaches and the staff members that were there really cared about them. But it's, tough moment for sure. When
certainly, an unprecedented time. First time it's probably ever happened. Men's basketball tournament then doesn't happen, and conferences later start, postponing the spring season. It's really like the domino effect. I think it was, one of the NBA players had tested positive for it, and then the NBA kind of canceled, and it was the domino that kind of put things in place. And as we progressed through, that spring semester with sports being postponed, and then we get into the summer, how did that change the typical experience during that spring and through this kind of summer period as we are into September now, for both student athletes and staff?
Well, I think we all agree that there's a vibrancy on campus when you have sports that are happening, when you see practices, right? When you when we're able to walk around and interact with our student athletes and we're able to interact with our staff. And, I just think that we miss that, right? When the weather starts to change, right, and you get that excitement, you're going to a baseball game, you're going to a lacrosse game, right, or you're going to a softball game, and you see some of those activities that are happening. It was tough, and then we had to pivot to figure out, well, how do we make sure that we're staying engaged with our student athletes, right? How do we make sure that we're staying engaged with our staff? And I don't think that anybody. We weren't experts at Zoom at that point, right? And so now we have to figure out, okay, we have to adjust, right?
I don't think most people even knew what Zoom was before all this.
Probably. It's probably true. It's probably true. So you think about, all right, so now we're going through remote learning as well too. So that's something new, right? What you're used to doing as far as playing your sport, being around your teammates, practicing, you have a schedule in place. And so like all of those things are now adjusting. And so trying to figure out how can we make sure that we're still giving our student athletes the experience and providing some value to them and making sure that we're connecting with them as much as possible. Like the hope is that because of these Zoom sessions, we found ways to be more efficient. We realized that we can do things that we probably haven't been able to do before. We were forced to embrace the change, right? Give us an opportunity to try to find innovative approaches to communicate and connect with one another. So I think like those are the positive things that have come out of it. I keep telling the staff that you have to take care of yourself, right? You have to do the right things, take the time away if you need to take the time away, use it as an opportunity to recharge your battery, use it as an opportunity to not shy away from, the moment, right? Like COVID and the pandemic can't make you hide, right? It has to be able to make you adjust to the current environment that we're in. And so I think like those are the positives that have come out of it, but certainly it was different. It was different, right? And when you think about, we've been able to see staff members recently, and they've been more excited than, ever. Just seeing I think we take for granted that human interaction, right? And we take for granted the interaction that we have with our student athletes and how we're seeing them grow and mature as they, matriculate through our campus. So certainly interesting times before, but I think it's important to, how do we find the positive out of this, right? Sure. And how do we allow those positive moments to give us the momentum to be able to excel once we enter what our new normal will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is such a crucial message for people to kind of understand, is just to be as positive as you can with it. And, everybody's learned so much. Like here we are, it's, the beginning of September, you're sitting in your house, I'm sitting in my house, we're on Zoom, we're recording a podcast. Like those were things that we didn't necessarily think we were going to be doing or have the technology capable to be doing. So, the fact that it's as simple as it is, I think it's hopefully a positive step that a lot of people take from it. Kind of moving into fall sports and how the summer kind of transpired. The Atlantic 10 announced on July 17th that fall sports seasons would be postponed until the spring semester, with a look-in window, coming mid-September-ish. Take us through kind of the behind the scenes. How was that decision made? Was it similar to the decision? Was it as quick and similar to the decision that was made back in March to, nix that season and the tournament?
So it certainly wasn't as quick, right? I think we have been really thorough in our assessment. We put together a medical advisory working group, right? And it has representatives from each one of our respective institutions. And then I think everyone on their individual campus has put together like a task force, right? And we have one obviously in athletics as well too, that also partners with the other task force that we have on campus. And, it's funny when we initially got into this process and we're creating the task forces, and we're at home doing remote, when you talk about family, so my middle daughter created a task force for us at home, right? Because she's hearing that word so often, right? So we got our own little, but so I digress. So back to, it was really thorough. And I think we were learning so much more about the pandemic and trying to figure out, like, what are the procedures that we need to put in place? What are the parameters, right? How do we return to our campuses? How do we handle the testing? How do we handle quarantine, isolation, and all of those pieces? And really utilizing the guidance and the expertise from our public health community, our medical experts, as we navigate the process. And it was really important to be able to get as many perspectives as we can, right? So you think about, like, what's the perspective of a coach, right? What's the perspective of a public health official? What's the perspective from an administration? What's the perspective from sports medicine? And ultimately, we relied on the guidance that we were able to get from the medical advisory group as it relates to making the decision. And, when you look at the trends and all the other things, it made sense for us to postpone. And it also made sense for us to be able to have an opportunity to have a look-in window in case something changed in the positive direction, right? And unfortunately, the trends didn't necessarily change, and the NCAA championships were shifted to the spring based on the amount of conferences or the amount of sports that dropped below 50% from a participation standpoint. And so therefore the look-in window was deemed moot at that point, right? If the championships aren't happening in the fall, right, it makes sense for us to move forward with planning for the spring and dedicate our attention in that direction. But really a thorough process. I feel really good about the way we got to the decision. We used the data, we used the expertise from the individuals that are living in the space, that have the knowledge, that once again have the expertise. And ultimately it's about health and safety, right? And not just for our student athletes, but for the entire campus community. It's really important to make sure that we are part of our campus communities. And can we do everything that we can to mitigate the virus? Can we do everything that we can to make sure that everyone on our college campus is safe and healthy moving forward?
So both men's and women's basketball schedules were not altered by the league's decision back in July. And as of right now, are we expected to tip off a schedule? Is that still the hope? Is that the plan?
So I think right now the plan is we're going to have a tip-off. As far as when that tip-off will be, we're waiting on guidance. I believe September 16th is the magic date that we'll get some information from the NCAA as to determine, what does it look like? Are we staying on schedule? Are we postponing it? There's, November 25th has been thrown out. December 4th has been thrown out. January 1 has been thrown out as well too. So I know that they're doing the same thing that we've done as far as being thorough and trying to figure out what makes the most sense and how do we obviously make sure that our student athletes are safe and healthy as we kind of go through the process. So I think everyone's excited for the possibility to play hoops, right? We've seen other leagues do it. Whether it's the NBA, whether it's, MLS, whether it's the WNBA. And so hopefully can we utilize some of their experiences to get to a really good place so we can have a college basketball season this year.
Talking return to campus now, classes started Monday, August 17th virtually, and ultimately went completely virtual for the semester. Talk about, some of the factors that led to that decision by the university.
Yeah, I think ultimately it was about, you got to keep the campus community safe, right? And utilizing the trends that we were seeing, and the trends weren't pointing in the right direction, right? And so I think because we, moved the semester up early, and it gave us an opportunity to to really be prudent in our decision-making process. Once again, we have multiple task forces and working groups, and you know, the objective is to try to be as diligent as possible, use the data that we have, use the expertise that we have to get to a decision that we felt comfortable with. And so ultimately it made sense to go remote, and you know, you see other institutions moving in that direction. You know, I think it's a different environment for sure, but I think everything that we're doing right now is different than, you know, we've done it in the past, right? And so it's not a year ago when I said, Ed, you have to wear a mask to go outside, you would have said, like, Brian, what are you talking about? Yeah. Right? Yeah. You know, I mean, maybe not even a year ago, right? 6 months ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, when it first started, I mean, nobody was wearing masks. That we didn't know that was a suggested guideline, like that, you know, that came a little while down the line through the process. And, you know, I think that just shows how fluid this situation is, and how changing and you know, the experts are learning different things every day about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember when the NCAA convention was in January, and it was in Anaheim, and on my flight back, I stopped to try to see if I can purchase a mask to fly back, right? And at that point, I don't think we knew as much, right? You started to hear some of the things sold out everywhere. You know, I tried, I think 9 CVS's before, and luckily I had a red eye, so I didn't have a bunch of people on the flight. But you know, but now, like, it's the norm. You know, I think we have, I don't know, 25, 30 different variations of different patterns, and it just becomes part of our normal environment. So, but, you know, you live and you adjust, and you sort of embrace the change as it comes.
Yeah. You know, with students not physically being on campus, how will this alter the academic support that our student athletes get? Like, certainly they went through a little bit of this in the spring semester, but now with a full semester of, you know, virtual learning, like how is that going to change for them?
You know, I think they'll be fine, right? Because the fact that we went through it in the spring, and I'm really proud of our student athletes when you think about what we did in the classroom, as far as 24 of our 25 teams, right, above a 3.0, and the thing that we know about our student athletes, they're resilient, right? And they have to adjust on the fly, because when you're playing in a competitive environment, it doesn't always go the way that the game plan may have said it was going to go. And so I'm really proud of the work that they've been able to do. Certainly it won't change the support that we're giving them. And I think we've learned so much from the spring, right? We learned some from the summer as well too. And so we're able to go into the environment with Christine and Kate, and really support our student athletes in the right way. But now they're experts a little bit in how do you navigate the remote learning environment. What's the best location that you need to be in? How do you do your work? How do you do the time management? And luckily, like, those are skills that they've been able to figure out even before we had to go into this environment. But that may be somewhat of our new normal, right? That taking an online class just becomes something that happens, right? Now, maybe you're not taking all online classes, but when you think about how higher education or just education may change in general, that's an adjustment that may potentially happen. So,
yeah, that learning curve period kind of out of the way for them, last semester. We've got the athletic director of LaSalle University, Brian Baptiste, with us on our first episode of Inside the L, the podcast. We're going to take a quick break, and next you're going to hear from Christa Plummer, our cross-country alumni, on our Alumni Spotlight. When we return from that with Brian, we're going to talk racial injustice. We're going to hear about some initiatives the department and the conference have going on. And then we're going to touch into Brian's year in review. He just hit his 1-year anniversary as the AD of LaSalle Athletics. I'm Ed LeFurge. We will be right back. All right, we're back here on Inside the L, the podcast. I'm your host, Ed LeFurge. We're going to jump into our alumni spotlight feature, and for our inaugural episode, we have Christa Plummer, now Christa Lawson, 2009 graduate from our track and field and cross country program. And Christa, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Christa is a emergency room nurse at Einstein Medical Center, just a few blocks from campus at Broad and Olney. And, you know, we thought it was really fitting to have Christa on during our first episode when, you know, you hear us talking to Brian about the pandemic and how it's affected, you know, student athletes and kind of our day-to-day operations. So Christa, what's it been like for you to, you know, experience being on the front line and, you know, witnessing, you know, everything that this pandemic has really thrown at people?
For me and my coworkers, it's sort of changed how we do our jobs entirely. You know, everything's a lot different. We, from the start, kind of had to change the systems that we used. And it's just really been eye-opening to see the stress that can be put on the system of healthcare and like how we have to handle that. It's actually, everything has kind of gotten a little bit better over the past few months, but there was a good probably 8-week period where we were running out of equipment. We had no beds in the hospital. So anyone that came in that needed to stay was just staying in the ER. And that was a little bit touch and go. So it was interesting to see, you know, like what the limits of the system are.
And so certainly for you in a position treating these patients and this pandemic and virus that, you know, for the beginning months of it were really unprecedented. We didn't know how to treat it, how to handle it. And so can you kind of talk about kind of like the ups and downs that you experienced as, you know, dating back to mid-March when things really got hectic in the United States to now when, you know, we are sort of flattening that curve, but still remaining with a relatively high case count?
Yeah, I would say early on, the biggest thing was just kind of for myself and everyone that I worked with was just fear. You know, we didn't really know how it was going to affect us and, you know, what the future looked like. So every day kind of going in was very scary. But, you know, our healthcare system is really great in America in that we kind of survive and adapt. So now we've kind of gotten to a point where we know what we're dealing with, how to handle it, how to safely handle it. And it's just gotten to be a lot more comfortable. But it was, for a while there, it was scary. You know, you go in, you're coming face to face with these patients. We're not sure if we had the right protection, and then coming home to your family. So that was a big thing.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned kind of coming home to your family, and you know, what is that like? Like, what was the biggest concern for you coming home from work and, you know, having loved ones at home that you have to worry about potentially passing this along to?
So it was really scary. As a family, we kind of did a lot of discussion about whether or not they would stay here or if I would live somewhere else. A lot of my coworkers did for a few months live other places. But we kind of decided that, you know, we were going into it together and we stayed together, and luckily we've been healthy so far. So hopefully it stays like that. But yeah, it was a little bit scary early on, kind of making that decision and not knowing if it was the right choice.
Yeah, and so you touched on a little earlier, like, you know, you guys were in a situation where, you know, you were lacking equipment for a little while, and fortunately now, you know, that has gotten better for you. But how has that kind of changed the normal day when you go into work, right? I imagine now you're wearing a lot more protective gear than you used to, probably, right?
Yeah, so we were working in N95s. Now we work in respirators, which are kind of similar to what you would paint a car in. It's like a big face mask. And I feel really well protected. I'm grateful that we have those because some of the other hospitals in the cities have not provided that yet. So, you know, that part of it has gotten a lot more comfortable. But really just kind of everything. It was interesting to, for the first time, not allow visitors in. So you have people who are very ill, you know, some of them not expected to survive, and you have to kind of tell them at the door that this is they cannot come in, you know. That was one of the harder things that we dealt with. Kind of one of those things that we just kind of have been learning as we go.
Yeah, and so like I imagine for your normal day-to-day shift, like, were you wearing gowns? You probably weren't wearing masks or face shields, but now in the pandemic, that's kind of become the norm.
Yeah, that's the norm. You're never without a mask. We're not to go into contact with any patient without a mask and a face shield, regardless of whether or not we think that they have COVID, because a lot of them do not have symptoms. So that kind of has, we're in it all day. We work 12.5-hour shifts and we're in it all day.
Well, I personally want to thank you for all that you're doing on the front. And, we're certainly proud of you at LaSalle for everything you're doing. I want to transition a little bit from the pandemic to kind of talking about you and your career at LaSalle. And you went into the Hall of Athletes in 2018. Like I mentioned earlier, you graduated in 2009. You served as an assistant coach for a season in 2010, a year in which you went to the United States Olympic trials. Kind of talk to me about what LaSalle has meant to you as you've kind of progressed into your career.
So LaSalle gave me opportunities that I may have found other places, but I'm not entirely sure that I would have found them other places. That's the place that raised me, basically. I spent the majority of my adolescent years into my early 20s there. So those are the people that I learned from pretty much everything, whether it's in my career or just, learning about life like you're a kid. And that's kind of where you get your moral code that you follow. And, it kind of shaped me as a person.
So what was the experience like for you being able to, I imagine you probably ran and did track probably in high school, and then you kind of come to LaSalle and you get to do it. From my experience working with student athletes, like, they do it because it's something that they love and something that they're passionate about. Was that the case for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was a big part of who I am, or that's just kind of how it was always for me. Running was a big deal for me. So I kind of found a home with the team there, and Coach Torpy, Charles Torpy. He was a huge mentor for me. So I was just really lucky to find such a good community that was a really nice fit for me.
You were named the Atlantic 10's most outstanding rookie at the cross country championships in 2004. So you kind of came in and, pun intended, hit the ground running.
Yes. Yeah. I had a lot of success sort of from the start, which was nice. It made it a really easy transition for me. And it just, things kind of grew from there. I had a really great time while I was there, both with running and academics and, the social aspect of everything. I think it really, I kind of blossomed as a person while I was there.
So touching a little bit more on Christa's achievements here, she helped the Explorers to 4 straight team titles at the A10 championships from 04 to 07. Over that time, she placed no lower than 6th individually, including 3 consecutive 4th place showings from 05 to 07 on the track. She was a 2-time Atlantic 10 indoor 3,000 meter champion and was named the A10 most outstanding performer at the 2009 outdoor meet and qualified for the NCAA Outdoor East Regionals in both the 5,000 meter run and the steeplechase. So, we've seen recent success from our cross country programs. They went and they claimed the A10 title this past fall. And so as an alumni for you, what is it like to see the programs being successful?
It's awesome. Every year we're kind of looking back to see how they're doing, how they're growing. Sometimes you get to meet the athletes personally, but even if you don't, I kind of read up on them every week, just see what's going on. And it's just really fun to follow along. And then once they, have started to have some success, it's really awesome to watch. They have a really good group of girls there, so it's fun.
So what is one piece of advice that, obviously you had a decorated career here, and, you went to the NCAAs, and, what is one piece of advice that if you could give any members of the team right now that you would give them?
I would tell them just to embrace it. You think you're there for a long time. It feels like it's a long time. It's really not in the grand scheme of life. So just to kind of, see what they can get out of it, give it as much as they can while they're there, and make sure that they're enjoying it and using all of their opportunities that they get.
If you had to go back and redo things differently, would you change anything you did?
I probably would have, I don't know. It's hard to say because, you know, like when you're in it, it's a different age. I like to think I would have been a little bit more dedicated and maybe done a little bit more, maybe stuck with it a little longer than I had. But no, I think, you know, kind of when you're in it, I think I had a good run of it.
All right, that's Christa Plummer, now Christa Lawson, 2009 graduate and LaSalle Hall of Athletes inductee in 2018, nurse at Einstein Medical Center, just a few blocks from campus at Broad and Olney. Christa, thanks so much for joining us here on our inaugural episode of the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be part of it. It's awesome.
All right, we're back here with the athletic director here at LaSalle University, Mr. Brian Baptiste. Great to hear and catch up with Christa Plummer. She's doing great things, working on the front lines through the pandemic. So certainly some great insight from her as to, you know, the things kind of going on. Let's be smart. Let's wear a mask. Let's socially distance. Let's do what we need to do to, you know, flatten the curve and get back to where we need to be. Back on here now with Brian, and you know, we talked the pandemic and return to campus and the effect that had, and certainly there's been some other stuff affecting the country as a whole, and talking racial injustice and social injustice, and you know, kind of talking about student athlete activism. I feel like we see a different situation every couple of weeks, it seems, in the country, and you know, peaceful protests are going on, and our student athletes have been participating in some of those, and they're utilizing their First Amendment rights to do so and speak out against these injustices. What's your message to the LaSalle community? Obviously, being the first Black AD at LaSalle, and you know, you've, I'm sure, throughout your life have experienced some of this. So, what is that message that, you know, you want to give to the entire LaSalle community?
Yeah, I just think that there's an urgency to the moment right now. And ultimately, it comes down to not only do we have to do better, but we have to demand better, right? And so no longer can we have these issues continue to happen, right? And it's been going on for way too long. And I'm encouraged to see the passion that our student athletes have. I'm encouraged to see the passion that, you know, members of our campus community, they have as well too. But we have to do our part, and we can't just do our part because it seems like it's the convenient thing to do right now. And we have to do our part because it's something that we're committed to doing, right? It's something about, we have to denounce hateful speech and racism, and we have to support social justice, and we have to support mutual respect, and we have to do it together, right? We have to do it together. We have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. These aren't easy conversations to have, right? And so I think we have to be able to think about the next generation, right? And that's what gives me some encouragement, to see the young people on our campus standing up for what they know is right. And it's not about doing what's comfortable. It's about doing what's right. And so, like, that's how we have to be able to kind of move through this environment. And we talk about, we have to be able to do it together. And we talk about, we have to learn, right? Like, we're all learning about, I've taken the time to really learn some of the things that I didn't know. And it's important for us to be able to figure out, how do we not replicate the mistakes of our past, right? And that's why the education piece is really important. That's why having conversations are really important. That's why understanding that people have differences and they have different opinions, but how do you come into those conversations with an open mind, and then, you know, take the action to really bring about some meaningful change. Is it going to happen tomorrow? It's probably not going to happen tomorrow, right? But we have to be really committed with some conviction, right? Not because it seems like the end thing to do, right? But is it, where are we 5 months from now? where are we 5 years from now, right? Where are we 10 years from now? Are you really committed to making sure that we can eradicate systemic racism and prejudice and all those things that are really hurtful to a group of people that are Black and brown, that look like me, that have been struggling for a really long time. And so it's going to take a lot of work, right? It's going to be some mental labor. It's going to be some emotional labor. It's going to be some physical labor. And, I'm excited to be able to lock arms with individuals that want to be able to do the work, right? And want to be able to have conversations in a respectful way and see different perspectives. But ultimately, I think we have to understand from a human decency standpoint, we got to do better.
Right. And, two things that have come out recently because of these issues going on. We'll touch first on the Black AD Alliance. The end of July, the creation of the Alliance was announced, with you being one of the 50 plus ADs nationwide to join this movement. What are some of the goals from this group?
Yeah, so I think it really started off as just an opportunity for us to come together and have a support group, right? And we were going through these challenging times and a lot of unrest that was happening within our country, but ultimately, we want to be able to promote the advancement of other, Black administrators, right? And how do we get more of those individuals in athletic director chairs? How do we create a pipeline to help support in the development and empowerment of those individuals? How do we also make sure that we're not forgetting about the social justice causes that are really important to us? And I think as we go through that process, right, we realize that it's important to be able to have allies. And so how do we create strategic alliances with allies and other groups and other organizations to make sure that the numbers that we're seeing, right, the low numbers that we're seeing from an administration standpoint, how do we make sure that those things are increasing moving forward? And we have different task forces and we want to make sure that we also develop our student athletes as well too, right? Because if you see someone that is in a role that you aspire to get to, then you feel like you have the opportunity to do it, right? Because you see somebody that looks like you, right? Or you see somebody that is doing it, so you have the opportunity to kind of pick their brains. And I think it's also important for us to not forget about our HBCUs, right? Our historically Black colleges and universities, and to make sure that we're supporting them as well too, and the things that they're trying to do on their respective campuses. So I'm glad to be part of the group. I'm glad that we are moving forward with doing some meaningful work, and hopefully as we continue to move through the process and we look back, right, that we can see that there's been some impact based on the alliance that we've been able to kind of do it together as a group.
Yeah, and the Atlantic 10 recently announced the launching of a new commission surrounding racial equity and diversity and inclusion. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that, right? That's an opportunity for us as a conference to really utilize our collective resources and expertise, right? And when you think about the communities that we serve, and the commission isn't focused just on athletics, right? It's focused on improving our campus communities, right? In improving our surrounding communities. And so when you think about the collection of the group, each institution has 3 members, and so a former current student athlete is one of the members. So to be able to get the perspective of the individuals that we're serving, right? The other representative will be a administrator on campus. So that could be an AD, it could be a president, it could be a coach, it could be a professor on your campus, right? It can be, any administrator in that role. And then the third one is the subject matter expert. So that can be somebody that's affiliated with your institution, right? As an employee. So maybe a chief diversity officer, chief diversity and inclusion officer, or it can be somebody that's connected to your institution that's working in the space, right? And so that's an opportunity to really get their expertise and use it as an opportunity to hold us accountable as we go through the process, right? And we want to bring about like meaningful change, and the ability for us to do it in a collective manner, I think it's really powerful. And I'm looking forward to the work that we're doing. I'm looking forward to working with the other individuals on their respective campuses to really see like what are some of the things that they're doing, right? And maybe we can figure out, if we have 11 out of 14 institutions that have a particular initiative, how do we get it to all 14 institutions have a particular initiative? And we can learn something from our various experiences. So I'm looking forward to the work. We're in the infancy of it, but you see some of the things that are organically happening. There's a men's basketball assistant coaches group that's doing some work. There's a women's basketball student athlete group that's also doing some work. And like those are organic movements that started outside of the commission, and we'll be able to support them and grow with those groups. But like that lets you know the moment and how people feel about, bringing about change. And, I would see more and more of those groups starting to pop up because, I talked about the urgency, and really the time is now for us to be able to do some of these things. And I'm just fortunate enough to be a part of the commission and being able to work with President Gormley at Duquesne with this work, and having the support of the conference as well too. It certainly means a lot to support these issues and bring about the change that we sorely need in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It is change that we need, and it's change that needs to happen. So, the fact that different groups and different commissions are naturally forming to really provide some guidance and some change that's long overdue is definitely a positive thing going on. A lot of times when we talk about issues like this, voting is often something that is emphasized. Earlier in August, the athletic department announced the Explore Your Right to Vote initiative, giving student athletes a day off and on election day, and providing the LaSalle community with some voting resources on our website. What prompted that decision?
I think it's really important. It's really important we have to, it's our civic duty to vote, right? And people have worked too hard for the right to be able to vote. And when you think about bringing about change, right, think about the power that you have in your vote. So you think about what happens in, if there's a district attorney that isn't prosecuting a individual because of a crime, right? Well, you have the ability to vote in that district attorney, and you have the ability to vote in your public officials because they're supposed to be serving their constituents, right? And being able to educate our student athletes about the power that they have in voting, right? Being able to make sure that we are being engaged as far as what can we do on election day, right? Are we going to have student athletes that are going to be poll workers, right? Which is what we hope. Are we going to have student athletes to make sure that we don't have any voter suppression happening? And not just student athletes, but our staff as well too. Like, we have to be able to do our part and make sure that we're engaged as much as possible, because people fought and died for the right for us to be able to have the opportunity to vote, and it makes a huge difference, right? And as much as we can do from an education standpoint to reinforce the importance of it, we'll do that. But as much as we can do to get out into the community to make sure that people have the opportunity to exercise their vote, that they are registering, that they aren't being pushed away from, polling stations, that polling locations have enough poll workers so they don't have to close, right? Like, those are some of the things that are really important. And I think we have an opportunity when we talk about, providing the experience to our student athletes, right? Like, this is a moment that they have to realize that they have great impact, and how can they use, we talk about that physical labor as well too. How can they utilize that to make sure that they're making a difference in the community and the country?
Definitely a lot of importance said right there from our AD, Brian Baptiste. Make sure you head to our website if you have any questions about that process. GoExplorers.com. Check out our social media channels at Go Explorers. We've got information and links there for not just our student athletes in the LaSalle community, but for any of our alumni or anybody listening. We talk about the process of applying for an absentee ballot and how to register to vote, and we've got National Voter Registration Day coming up later this month. So just be on the lookout for the stuff that we're putting out, because it's important. Brian said it. We've got so much more we need to touch on with Brian. We're gonna have to bring it back for episode 2, Brian. We've hit so much importance here. We still haven't even gotten into your year in review. We didn't get to touch on the success of our fall teams and some A10 championship titles we brought back to 20th and all in the men's and women's basketball doing it. Academics, you mentioned earlier, we're so great, and community service numbers, new initiatives for the department. So we're gonna have to find some more time to bring you back for episode 2.
Well, I appreciate you welcoming me back, and I'm looking forward to it. I had a bunch of fun being able to interact with you, and look forward to doing it again here soon. So I appreciate it for sure. Yeah,
Brian, we appreciate you and your time. We thanks to our listeners for tuning into our inaugural episode here of Inside the L, the podcast. That was the athletic director at LaSalle University, Mr. Brian Baptiste, and we did our alumni spotlight with Christa Plummer. We thank them both for their time and joining the podcast. Make sure you stay tuned every 2 weeks. We're going to put out a new episode to give you guys a behind-the-scenes look. It's going to vary from staff and coaches and student athletes, alumni. We really want to provide our community and our fans with the opportunity to kind of see some insight here. Be safe, wear a mask, socially distance. I'm Ed LeFurge. We thank you, and we will see you next time on Inside the L, the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Inside the L, the podcast. Go Explorers!